Okay, here's part 2 of the endocrine system, and we'll be looking at human endocrine glands. Okay, there we go. So the endocrine glands obviously are scattered throughout the body, and they regulate a variety of activities. And we're getting ready to talk about some of those in a few seconds. So here's a diagram of the endocrine system, and you would be expected to be able to label this, either a male or a female. The major glands include all of these, and these are the ones that I want to make sure that you know. The pineal gland is not on here, but as I told you in the other video, remember the pineal gland? Do you remember the hormone? That's right, it was melatonin. Okay, so make sure that you know that one also. So you have non-tropic and tropic hormones. The difference between the non-tropic and tropic hormones is that tropic hormones will act on another endocrine gland. So remember how the hypothalamus acted on the pituitary? Okay, and then we also said that the pituitary gland acted on many different endocrine glands. Those would be tropic hormones. And then the non-tropic hormones are ones that directly stimulate cells. So example would be insulin. Go ahead and you might want to stop the video so you can go ahead and fill in your concept map. On the concept map, it kind of gives you what the different glands regulate. Okay, so pituitary regulates growth and water balance. It also works with reproduction. You know that the ovaries and testes deal with reproduction. The thyroid for metabolism, parathyroid, pancreas, and the thyroid also deal with calcium and glucose levels. And then the adrenal glands respond to stress. So the hypothalamus is in the part of the brain attached to the posterior pituitary. Posterior to the pituitary. If you remember, anterior was the head, posterior was the bottom. So it's in the back of the pituitary gland. So this is the pituitary gland right here. And then the hypothalamus is behind it, above it and behind it. So there's a chart on page 983, and it gives you all the different things that the pituitary gland deals with, or has hormones that and the functions that are regulated. Okay, so here's our pituitary gland, and behind it obviously is the hypothalamus. It has two parts. It has what's called the anterior pituitary, which would be towards the front, and the posterior pituitary, and they do different things. Here's another way to look at it, and on the right here I have a picture of an actual pituitary gland removed from a person. Okay, so you can kind of see, compare that to the diagram here. Now, the pituitary and hypothalamus work together, and we've got this negative inhibition feedback loop. It was kind of like when we talked about how your temperature was regulated. Those of y'all that had me last term, I also talked about the liver and the pancreas, how the insulin glucagon are regulated. So basically what happens, if the hormone is present, it will inhibit, okay, we're looking at this hormone right here. If it's present, it will inhibit the hypothalamus from releasing these hormones. But if the hormone is low, okay, we'll make another symbol. We'll just say I'll arrow down. It will increase the amount of hormones that the hypothalamus gives off. So the way this kind of works is, let me erase this. Can I erase it? No. I don't know why, but okay. Well, you have your hypothalamus, and it releases hormones. These are the ones that it releases here. It's not necessary that you know the names of them now, but just know that it is a negative feedback inhibition loop. So the hormones it releases causes the anterior pituitary to give off tropic hormones. And remember, tropic hormones act on other glands. Well, once these glands release their hormones, those hormones being present inhibit the hypothalamus from producing, and they also inhibit the anterior pituitary from putting out those hormones. So if they're present, anterior pituitary won't do anything. When they're not present, the hypothalamus does something, releases some hormones that cause the anterior pituitary to release its hormones. Here are some of the hormones of the anterior pituitary, and you see that there are quite a few of them. Okay. This would be in that chart that I told you on page 983. You'll be able to see those also. On the left here, I also found a little bit of information for you. These are non-tropic. These are non-tropic and tropic. And these are tropic only. So next let's go on to the thyroid gland. And you know that it regulates metabolism. We kind of talked about this several times in class. And here's your thyroid gland, a little bit below your larynx. And we know that the thyroid produces thyroxine. That's the hormone that regulates your metabolism. So if a person had to have their thyroid removed, like say for cancer, or maybe it's not working correctly, they have different ways that they remove it. I've had friends that have had them removed, and one way is that they use radiation and shrink it down so it's really, really small. Or maybe in the case of cancer, they might have to surgically remove it. But when you don't have your thyroid, what happens is they give you a synthetic hormone. It's called synthroid, and it has the same effect as thyroxine. It's a little bit closer picture of it. Now, sometimes you might have heard of hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism, and here I've given you the symptoms. So if they're hyperthyroid, we know that they metabolize things fast, so they probably have a lower weight, so they have weight loss. They may even have an elevated temperature because of the increased metabolism. And then hypothyroidism is basically the opposite of hyperthyroidism. And then in your documents on goiter, you have a picture of a guy who has an enlarged thyroid gland. That would be an extreme case. Sometimes it's just a little bit big where you may or may not even notice it. And it's caused by an iodine deficiency. Iodine, the mineral. If you ever look at the containers for salt, they'll say iodized salt. That's one of the main ways that you get iodine. Parathyroid glands are on the outside of the thyroid, and they help to regulate calcium levels in the blood. The hormone that does that is PTH, called parathyroid hormone. And the way it does that is it instructs the kidneys to reabsorb calcium, or keep in some of the calcium, and also to keep in calcium from the digestive system, so the digestive system works or absorbs the calcium. Here's where the parathyroid glands are. They're teeny tiny, aren't they? Those little nodules right there. Adrenal glands, we know that these are on top of the kidneys, and they help to deal with stress, that fight or flight response. Here they are right here. And you have what's called the adrenal cortex, which is the outer layer, just like we did with the kidney. And then you have the adrenal medulla, which is the intersection. The cortex produces over 24 hormones. Two main ones that you need to know about are aldosterone and cortisol. Aldosterone and cortisol. Then here I've got what they deal with, or what they do. In the medulla, that's where the epinephrine and norepinephrine are. And these are the effects of them. Now, sometimes you may have friends who have allergies and they have to carry an EpiPen. Now, if you look at this, EpiPen, Epi stands for epinephrine. Okay, that's your EpiPen. And if you notice here, it says causes air passageways to open wider. And that would be very important if someone's having an allergic reaction to peanuts or something like that. It also gives a release of extra glucose that gives you your energy. Remember, fight or flight response. In the pancreas, it has exocrine and endocrine functions. Exocrine and endocrine. If you remember, in the digestive system, what did the pancreas do in the digestive system? That's right. It gave off enzymes that help to break down food. And as an endocrine gland, it gives off insulin and glucagon. And that helps to regulate blood sugar. Okay. You can read this on your own. I don't have to read it to you. So when we're talking about diabetes, we talk about it a lot because we talk about the insulin and the glucagon. Well, the diabetes mellitus is the one that deals with insulin. Insulin. That insulin and glucagon balance, or your blood glucose balance rather. And that can be caused by, you have type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is usually when a person's born with it, and maybe they don't produce insulin. Type 2 is when the insulin stops having effect, and usually that's when a person's older, maybe 40s, 50s, and it may still produce insulin, but your body doesn't respond to it. The target cells don't respond to it, or body may not make it anymore. Another type of diabetes I want you aware of is called diabetes insipidus. This has nothing to do with insulin or glucagon. It deals with another hormone that's called vasopressin. And vasopressin has an effect on your blood pressure. Okay, and the kidneys don't respond to it. And when they don't respond to it, it can cause really excessive urination. You also have reproductive glands, gonads, and females have gonads also. Gonads would be your testes for males and then your ovaries for females. We should know what they do by now. We've talked about them enough this year. We know that testosterone is the one for male characteristics. There you go. And we know that estrogen is with female characteristics. The FSH and the LH have to do with the maturation of the egg in the ovary. Okay. Causes the follicle to mature and rupture open, releasing the egg. And then progesterone deals with preparing the uterus for the woman to be pregnant, so arrival of a developing embryo. So let's go ahead and answer these. That's right, insulin. Remember this one? Good. Thyroxine. Gonads, we just talked about them. Good. Calcium. Which one was the one that dealt with calcium? Do you remember? Hopefully you remember at least one of these that dealt with calcium. Right, that parathyroid gland, that PTH hormone, and thyroid. Epinephrine. Yep, fight or flight. Good. And that's the end of part 2 on the endocrine system. Let me stop.